faithfully delivering value and exploring great books worldwide. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're diving into the book, The Power of Decisions. People make choices every day, from big ones like work, study, promotions, and raises, to small ones like picking a movie or choosing a restaurant. Each decision acts like a vote that shapes the fate of businesses and institutions. Why are some businesses bustling with customers while others are deserted? What really influences people's decisions? How can we steer people's decisions? The book we're covering today offers practical strategies to help us better influence others and make smarter choices. The author, Bob Nisbet, earned his PhD at Stanford University under Ron Howard, the pioneer of decision analysis. After graduating, he became the chief scientist at Express Scripts. Through years of hands-on experience, Nisbet found that people's decision-making often clashes with traditional decision theory. Traditional decision theory assumes people are rational, seeking maximum gain at minimum cost. But Nisbet discovered that people don't actually crunch the numbers carefully. Gains and losses in decisions rely not on rationality, but on instinctive tendencies. For instance, supermarkets place higher margin items at eye level. Lower margin items go to the bottom shelves. People usually just grab a few, similar products at eye level, giving them a quick symbolic comparison. Then they toss the chosen item into their cart. In reality, whichever item people pick, the supermarket still locks in a solid profit margin. So how do supermarkets sway our choices? It's because they tap into people's laziness. Folks don't want to bend down to check out other options. People think that comparing a few items is enough, and this laziness is actually an instinctive tendency. These instinctive tendencies are physiological and cognitive patterns formed through evolution. We're subconsciously driven by these tendencies, skipping deep thought and making snap decisions. Following instincts can lead to unexpected outcomes. Therefore, understanding instinctive tendencies is key to influencing decisions. That's why Nisbet penned The Power of Decisions. Next, I'll break down the book's core ideas through two key questions. First, how instinctive tendencies are formed. Second, how to leverage instinctive tendencies to influence people's decisions. Let's start with the first question. How do instinctive tendencies come about? The book highlights four instinctive tendencies: inattentiveness, inertia, competitive mindset, and loss aversion. First, let's look at inattentiveness. It often causes people to forget important things and overlook crucial information. So how did it develop? In hazardous environments, to dodge dangers like poisonous snakes and predators, the brain prioritizes attention to survival-related things. Becoming hypersensitive to movement, even tiny disturbances trigger alertness. This is how the brain formed the instinctive tendency of inattentiveness. There are plenty of examples like this in our daily lives. For instance, when chatting with the TV on, even if it's a show they're not into, people often get distracted by the moving visuals. Also, waving arms broadly in a crowd can quickly catch a faraway friend's eye. All these show instinctive tendencies in action. The second tendency is inertia. It leads people to form habits of avoiding deep thought and resisting change, which could eventually lead to social obsolescence. The cause is high brain energy consumption. It uses over 20% of the body's total energy. To cope with resource-poor environments, the brain must cut down on energy use. How does it do that? According to Nisbet, the brain can take in 10 million bits of info per second, but it only focuses on processing urgent survival critical data. The processing cap for that is just 50 bits per second. 10 million bits versus 50. What's that all about? 10 million bits is like a 600,000 word novel, while 50 bits is just 3 Chinese characters, showing a major bottleneck in the brain's info processing. The third tendency is competitive mindset. It appears positive, but can easily spark panic buying sprees. And like rushing to buy salt or bandlangen. Competitive psychology is the mindset where individuals in a group strive to outdo others. How did it form? That's because to survive tough conditions, one had to be faster, stronger, and grab more resources than fellow group members. Throughout people's lives, from infancy, fighting for mom's affection, to growing up competing for toys with peers, and as adults, scrambling for promotions and raises, and in old age, hey, fighting for square dancing spots, right? Finally, let's look at the fourth instinctive tendency, loss aversion. This mentality makes people conservative, causing them to miss great opportunities. Loss aversion. It means people care more about losses than gains. For example, finding 100 yuan on the road only brings fleeting happiness. However, if 100 yuan is missing from your wallet, you might dwell on it for weeks. Why do people care more about the lost 100 than the found one? This is because in evolutionary history, human ancestors were always on the brink of survival. They couldn't afford losses, as even minor ones could spell disaster. Thus, humans evolved loss aversion, constantly reminding us to guard our resources. Today, inattention, laziness, blind conformity, and conservatism have become chronic issues for humanity. The cause isn't that people lack self-discipline or ambition. It's that instinctive tendencies formed over long evolution still dominate decision-making. Understanding why these tendencies form and leveraging strengths while avoiding weaknesses helps influence people's behaviors. Having answered the first question, now let's look at the second. How to use instinctive tendencies to influence decisions. Nisbet and his team designed a behavioral program called the 50-Bit Mindset Program. The program's name comes from the brain's info processing limit, only 50 bits per second. Today, I'll focus on explaining the four most representative strategies in this program. First, the initial strategy. Actively ask others to make choices. Often, people make poor choices not because they intend to, but because they're accustomed to certain consumption habits. For example, someone intends to lose weight, but living near a snack street, after work, they smell the aromas and end up buying snacks. Why is that? Earlier, we learned about the brain's tendencies of inattention and inertia. People's attention prioritizes survival-related matters. For instance, searching for food or moving to a new place. After a busy day, people are at their most exhausted state, and their lazy brains resist spending energy to control appetites. If someone could give you a timely reminder then, or if you moved away from the snack street, this habit might change. That's what actively asking others to make choices means. Precisely for this reason, when people are about to make habitual choices, we interrupt their thinking and prompt them to make better decisions. How can we apply this strategy? Let's examine a medication home delivery case study. Chronic disease patients require long-term prescription medications. Typically, patients choose to buy meds at local retail stores, but often they forget refills and miss doses, dramatically increasing health risks and insurance costs. To better manage conditions and reduce insurance expenses, Nisbet's company Express Scripts launched home delivery with prominent pharmacy ads. But results were disappointing. Only a few patients chose delivery while most kept buying at retail stores. How to improve this situation? Innovative approach designed a solution. At checkout, a dialog box pops up on screen. It asks patients if they want home delivery, with staff explaining benefits while urging them to seriously consider their needs and honestly state preferences. The result? Nearly 70% chose home delivery. Here, patients didn't reject delivery due to poor appeal, but from lacking motivation to change routines. Going to retail stores isn't too troublesome, and choosing delivery doesn't offer extra joy. By proactively presenting the delivery option, the pharmacy interrupted inertia tendencies, made patients aware of better choices, and effectively changed decisions. Okay, now the second strategy, voluntary opt out, setting a default choice while allowing people to opt out. What is a default option? Spicy Sichuan cuisine is the default option, meaning it's the only choice provided. This approach has two key benefits. First, it lowers the design cost of the strategy. For example, restaurants only need one menu instead of countless versions to satisfy all tastes. Secondly, it reduces people's decision-making burden. Like when you enter a Sichuan restaurant, spicy is automatically chosen, no need to consider other flavors. What if people aren't satisfied with the default? You can opt out, say, by walking past that Sichuan restaurant. If you dislike spicy food, your best bet is simply not to enter, rather than trying to change the chef's habits. Now that we understand voluntary opt out, let's see how to apply this strategy. In the 1990s, in developed European regions, organ donation typically required signing a consent form during one's lifetime, with only 15% participation. To boost donation rates, some countries adopted the voluntary opt out strategy in their donation programs. The specific approach, all citizens were defaulted into posthumous donation, requiring those unwilling to file a separate application. Result? These countries achieved 90% donation rates, 6 times higher than nations without the opt-out system. Public attitudes toward organ donation should be similar within the same region, yet different strategies led to huge gaps. Countries without opt-out systems, people didn't oppose donation. Inertia prevented them from timely signing consent forms. See, signing brought little benefit, while not signing carried no penalty. No motivation to change the status quo meant low participation. But in opt-out countries, unwilling donors must file applications to withdraw. Remember what we discussed earlier? Humans are inherently lazy. The opt-out strategy redirected inertia to the withdrawal stage. Opting out requires changing the status quo, and without motivation, withdrawal rates stay low. That covers voluntary opt-out, which connects to our earlier actively asking choices strategy. These strategies share similarities. Both tackle problems starting from laziness. Actively asking others to make choices interrupts people's reluctance to change the status quo. The voluntary opt-out strategy, on the other hand, leverages people's unwillingness to change. That is to say, in some situations, these two strategies can be interchangeable. Again, using the medication home delivery example, this time Misbet and his team used the voluntary opt-out strategy to design the plan. Okay, to further increase the home delivery service rate. For instance, first, enroll all patients meeting long-term prescriptions into the most aggressive plan, defaulting them to home delivery. Then give them 60 days to consider. During these 60 days, patients can opt out anytime, and the final outcome was excellent. Nearly 90% of patients didn't opt out of the default choice, and the home delivery rate increased by 20%. So, what situations suit which strategy? Next, we'll discuss the pros and cons of both strategies in terms of engagement, legal aspects, and cost. And first aspect, engagement. Voluntary opt-out has lower engagement. At the start, users aren't involved in the plan's design. Only if they're unhappy later do they exercise their rights. Actively asking for choices has stronger engagement. People voice their true intentions under guidance and make their own choices. Second aspect, legal. Since laws prohibit bundled sales, you can't set bundled items as the default option. For example, gas stations can't bundle lubricants with fuel. Sales can't make adding lubricant the default option. Third aspect, cost-focused. Actively asking for choices requires designers to reach every customer, greatly increasing costs. Overall, as long as engagement isn't overemphasized and it's legally permitted, voluntary opt-out should be prioritized. All right, we've covered the actively asking choices and voluntary opt-out strategies. Next, let's look at the third strategy, reframing options. Usually, people choose an option based on some theory or framework. What is a framework? A framework is the angle from which people view problems. For example, the same half full glass, a pessimist sees it as only half left, while an optimist sees it as still half remaining. From different perspectives, people come to different conclusions. So, setting a framework for people to think within makes it more likely to achieve the results we want. The key to setting a framework is to use language that aligns with instinctive tendencies, not false, exaggerated, or sensational language. Take the example of estate tax. Its original purpose was to regulate wealth inequality and prevent excessive wealth concentration among the rich. And wealthy Republicans in the US naturally want to abolish the estate tax to pay less taxes. How can they pass the proposal to abolish the estate tax in Congress? Republicans exploited people's sympathy for the deceased by framing the estate tax as a death tax, making people feel like the government is taxing even the dead. This not only gained widespread support from the middle class, but also sparked strong reactions among the poor. Next, let's focus on two methods for reframing options. First, let's look at the initial method. As mentioned earlier, loss aversion affects people. They care more about losses than gains. So we can use loss aversion to set a framework for people. For example, a tumor removal surgery guarantees a 5-year survival rate. Initially, in the treatment plan provided to patients, the short-term efficacy was described this way. It said the 1-month mortality rate was 10%, and as a result, less than 50% of patients chose the surgery, while others opted for conservative therapies with shorter survival times. So, how to convince patients to choose surgery? The doctor simply changed the description to 1-month survival rate of 90%. After changing the wording, a proportion of patients choosing surgery rose to 85%. Clearly, these two descriptions are mathematically equivalent, but they feel different to patients. One brings despair, the other gives hope, in this case, to make patients choose the tumor removal surgery with a higher survival rate. In the surgical plan description, doctors should avoid terms like mortality rate, which represent loss, and replace them with survival rate, emphasizing the positive side to set an optimistic framework for patients, encouraging them to think positively and accept the surgery. All right, next, let's look at the second method for reframing options. This method leverages competitive psychology. In groups, due to resource scarcity, people want to do better and get more than other members. So we can place people in a group setting, use language to spark their competitive drive, and achieve our desired outcome. But let's look at a case that encourages people to save electricity. Researchers distributed electricity reports to test subjects. The report not only listed the subject's own usage, but also included their neighbor's consumption. As a comparison, it told them, you're more energy efficient than 60% of your neighbors, while also giving tips on saving electricity. 6 months later, tracking showed that subjects' electricity consumption decreased by about 2%. In this case, researchers guided people to compete with neighbors in saving electricity, achieving the goal of energy conservation. We can also use similar methods to stimulate consumption. For example, payment apps release year-end summaries telling users how much they spent last year and what percentage of national users they beat. Through such language, it evokes a group consumption competition, stimulating people to spend more next year. Reframing options is the book's key focus and the hardest strategy to implement. We mainly discussed how to reframe options using loss aversion and competitive psychology. These methods leverage instinctive tendencies already in people's minds, avoiding adding too much subjectivity, and use appropriate language to set different frameworks to influence decisions. Okay, finally, let's take a look. The fourth strategy, reasonable simplification. There are several similar generic drugs on the market. Usually, people choose the one with the catchiest name. Facing a table full of dishes, people tend to pick the ones closest to them. What factors influence people's decisions? There are two aspects. One is that the options information is simple, so people can choose without much effort. Like when book fonts are friendly, reading speeds increase. The other aspect is that the option is closer to people. They don't need to expend much energy to access it. For example, if you're watching TV with snacks in your lap, you'll end up eating a lot without realizing it. Why is that? This is because the brain has instinctive tendencies of inattention and inertia. Therefore, to guide people toward our desired choices, we should simplify option information and place options closer, reducing the brain's burden and energy consumption. This makes people more likely to choose those options. Now that we understand reasonable simplification, during design we must distinguish between good and bad options. For good options, simplify information and place them closer. For bad options, complicate information and place them farther away. When should we simplify option information? For example, to slow readers at key points, use bold fonts to reduce reading speed. When should we place options farther away, like discouraging high-calorie snacks by banning desk candy and centralizing it in pantries? Now, let's apply simplification through a home renovation plan to boost family learning. Suppose we want more family reading time, then TV becomes a bad option. Design the renovation by first placing good options closer. Convert the TV wall to bookshelves and add reading nooks in every room for spontaneous reading. Second, place bad options farther, like positioning the TV facing the treadmill, linking viewing urges to workout discomfort. Finally, simplify good options. Post visible, easy to read, study reminders around the house. All right, that concludes the reasonable simplification strategy. Simplification permeates the 50-bit mindset program and complements other strategies. During simplification, fully address logistical support. Increased simplification costs mean designers must do extra work. First, how instinctive tendencies are formed. Second, how to leverage instinctive tendencies to influence people's decisions. Let's start with the first question. How are instinctive tendencies formed? The book highlights 4 instinctive tendencies: inattentiveness, inertia, competitive mindset, and loss aversion. First, let's look at inattentiveness. It often causes people to forget important things and overlook crucial information. So how did it develop? In hazardous environments, to dodge dangers like poisonous snakes and predators, the brain prioritizes attention to survival-related things, becoming hypersensitive to movement. Even tiny disturbances trigger alertness. Thus, the brain formed the instinctive tendency of inattentiveness. There are plenty of examples like this in our daily lives. For instance, when chatting with the TV on, even if it's a show they dislike, people often get distracted by the moving visuals. Also, waving arms broadly in a crowd can quickly catch a faraway friend's eye. All these show instinctive tendencies in action. The second tendency is inertia. It leads people to form habits of avoiding deep thought and resisting change, which could eventually lead to social obsolescence. The cause is high brain energy consumption. It uses over 20% of the body's total energy. To cope with resource-poor environments, the brain must cut down on energy use. How does it do that? According to Nisbet, the brain can take in 10 million bits of info per second, but it only focuses on processing urgent, survival-critical data. The processing cap for that is just 50 bits per second. 10 million bits versus 50. What's that all about? 10 million bits is like a 600,000 word novel, while 50 bits is just three Chinese characters, showing a major bottleneck in the brain's info processing. The third tendency is competitive mindset. It appears positive but can easily spark panic buying sprees, like rushing to buy salt or bandwagon. Competitive psychology is the mindset where individuals in a group strive to outdo others. How did it form? That's because to survive tough conditions, one had to be faster, stronger, and grab more resources than fellow group members.